Hello and welcome to this episode of Grassroots Advocacy, applying the local effort. We're really glad that you're joining us today, and if this is your first time as a viewer, I'd encourage you to go back and look at the previous episode so you get the big picture of advocacy. In our last episode, we really focused on advocacy that happens outside of your care setting. So advocacy in your local community, at the state level, and then of course at the federal level. And today we're really going to do a deeper dive into the advocacy that you apply in your local community. So when we talk about advocacy in your local community, there are basically three ways to think of that. You could think of that in terms of the advocacy you do with social agencies. You could think about that in terms of advocacy for other healthcare organizations in your community. And you can think about that in terms of advocacy in politics. So let's take a moment and look at advocacy in your local community. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about is, as an advocate, there are a number of agencies or organizations in your community that it might be helpful for you to reach out to, because they may have a really good understanding of what the needs of your local community are, and they might help you shape your message and your activities as a grassroots advocate. Now, I want to say real quickly before we continue, it's really worth noting that grassroots advocacy, happens here at the local level. It happens in your city. It happens in your county. It happens right by where you live and work. So when we talk about advocacy in your local community, one of the things that's important to realize is, what are the various agencies that serve a frail, elder, and aged population? So one of those agencies is the Division of Family Services. It might also be called the Division of Aging. It might also be called the Department of Human Services. And this agency is responsible for understanding what the social needs and the well-being needs are of the people in their community. These organizations are also, generally speaking, responsible for administrating programs that are relative to income, are relative to healthcare, and that are relative to nutrition and dietary needs and things of that nature. It's good to know that agency, because they will have some sense of what's going on with the elders in your community. Then you have the Area Agency on Aging, and that is an organization in your community that really looks at aging services in a comprehensive way. In some communities, the program Meals on Wheels, which is a food supplement program, is administered by the Area Agency on Aging. Then you have the senior centers, and that's the places where your elders in your community go to have social interaction. They may also go there to have lunch. They may also go there for entertainment purposes. And so understanding these agencies, these local agencies, is really good for you in terms of knowing that they exist, knowing where they are, knowing what's going on with them, because they may be able to help you. Of course, they may be able to help you form your message. You may also be able to help them. I'll give you a perfect example. A year or so back, the federal government decreased the funding for the Meals on Wheels program. Well, in our community, Meals on Wheels is managed by the Area Agency on Aging. We also sometimes call that AAA, but then that gets us confused with AAA that fixes your car, and we don't want to do that. But so the point is because of that decreased funding, the Area Agency on Aging reached out into the community to establish a larger network of volunteers to be able to continue to run that program and also stay within the new budgetary requirements. So that's an example of how you knowing about that organization might give you an idea of what you could do in your local community. Another example of this would be when you are looking at a community that maybe doesn't have aging services, doesn't have Meals on Wheels, or doesn't have homebound checks or things of that nature. Maybe you could work with these governmental agencies to help establish those programs that then help us to better serve the needs of the elders within our community. So it's really important to think about that and to get to know those folks. Go out, introduce yourself, find out what's going on in your community. It's a really great way to get involved. Now, besides the governmental agencies, there are other things that you can do as a grassroots advocate in your local community. For example, you can partner with public schools. As you all know, I served NACA, and in the early days of NACA, we did a campaign called Project Education. And the idea behind that was to get out to sixth grade classes. I misspoke. To get out to third grade classes to do an informational day about what it means to be a certified nursing assistant. And so our members would go out to local schools. We had created a coloring book. Our members also took their blood pressure cuffs, their stethoscopes, their pulse oximeters. They took a bunch of different things that they could pass around the classroom so kids could get interested and engaged and have some participation. This project was really intended to help these youngsters start to think about the profession of certified nursing assistant, to start to think about how they might want to do that. You know, when we're little kids, we say, I want to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an Indian chief. Well, we can add to that mix, I want to be a CNA. So that was an example of working with your local public schools. Another great example of working with your local public schools, one of our members in the great state of Oklahoma, the Sooner State, go Sooners, they actually went out and participated in a high school career fair. So they set up a booth, they set up some games, they had a really good time. And what they were doing is they were getting these young people as they were getting ready to graduate from high school and getting them to consider how cool it might be to become a certified nursing assistant. So that's another example of how you might partner with your community, your public schools in your community to advocate for your profession as a certified nursing assistant. Another way that you can serve as an advocate in your community is by touching base with other healthcare organizations. For example, the local hospital, the local home health organizations, the local hospice organizations, the local helper organizations. Getting out, meeting them, talking to them, finding out what they're seeing and what they're experiencing will help you to better understand what the needs are in your community. Pardon me. Not too long ago, on another program, CNA Heroes, Lisa Sweet, our co-founder and chief clinical officer, highlighted a wonderful young lady named Darla from Missouri who actually does a lot of not necessarily fundraising, but gathers lots of materials together that she takes to Jefferson City that are then donated to veterans throughout the state who are in need. Some veterans who are going from homelessness and they need home products so that they can set up their new home and different things like that. So that's an example of working with another organization that helps to advocate for our profession. Now, the final piece of today's session is really built around politics. A couple of weeks ago, my daughter Lexi and I had the opportunity to go to a local fair in town. And while we were at that fair, there were like 40 or 50 booths set up. Now, most of those booths were vendors and things of that nature. but a portion of those booths were set up by politicians who are running for midterm election. So Lexi and I took the opportunity to stop at each of those political booths to talk to the candidate, to find out what she or he was thinking about, what motivated them to run, and what they hope to accomplish should they become elected. This is really very helpful because a number of times when we hear about political candidates, we're hearing about them from the standpoint of what they're putting out as a press release. So it's their formal statement. Or we might hear about them from what they do in terms of radio commercials and TV commercials and things of that nature. So that's a very one-way sort of way they communicate with us. The best way to really get a feel for the candidate is to go visit them. Go to their local office, go to their campaign office. If they happen to host a rally, go to that rally. It's really important for us to understand the elected officials who will be governing our country and our politics. Because if we understand them, then we can better cast our vote as an informed voters. There's something else that I wanted to share with you about local politics, and that is this. As a grassroots advocate, where you will have potentially have the greatest individual impact is in the local political arena. So, for example, I shared with you that Lexi and I went to that fair and that we talked to a lot of politicians. Well, a couple of the politicians that we were speaking with weren't necessarily as well educated on the Medicaid reimbursement process and on how the Medicaid program works for the state of Missouri. Many of them were also not aware of the fact that we have a substantial shortage of qualified caregivers or CNAs in our country. And so sometimes we can educate them just as much as the information we get from them. So I really want to encourage you as a grassroots advocate to look at these 3 different approaches or techniques that you can use in your communities as a grassroots advocate. And figure out which one of those is going to really be beneficial for you, or what's going to work for you, or what fits your interest and your passion, and then go after it with a lot of zeal and enthusiasm. I have a couple more points that I want to make before we wrap up today. I wanted to also say to you that in the coming months, we are going to do something slightly different in our format for these episodes, and I need your help with that. Up until this point, and for actually 2 more segments or 2 more episodes, everything is going to be very structured, and it's going to be based on trying to share information and concepts and activities that you can actually physically apply. As we get a little further down the road, though, what we would really like to do is we'd really like to have you submitting your concerns, your interests, your desires to us, either if you are a YouTuber, when you watch this episode, or when you watch future episodes, there's a comments portion, and you can type a comment that says, what do you do if your leaders don't treat you like a professional? And then we will talk about approaches or techniques that you can use as a grassroots advocate to improve that relationship. So please be on the lookout for that. If you're not a YouTuber, please feel free to visit all of our social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest. There's a number of ways that you can reach out to us. And please feel free to do that. And please feel free to share your interests, so we make sure we really start to pull those real world situations into the information that we're sharing in these coming episodes. The next thing that I'd like to say as I start to wrap up is this past week, or last week, I should say, pardon me, I had the opportunity to be visiting in the great state of Oklahoma. And I heard a couple of people say, why would I want to do extra? And what they were talking about at that particular time was they were talking about, why would I want to do extra education? Why would I want to do anything outside of my facility? Now, the reasons that people were asking that question were pretty varied. Some of the people asking that question, why would I want to? Because they're extremely busy, because they have a home, they have a job, they have kids, they have all of these things going on. And so taking additional time to do advocacy activities or to do continuing education, things of that nature, seems pretty difficult. Other folks submitted that why question. When you really listen to what they had to say, they were saying they weren't confident that they could in fact make a difference. Everybody who wants to make a difference can make a difference. Now, sometimes we have to be realistic and say, can we make a difference with one person, or can we make a difference with 100 people? And if I make a difference with one person, is that good enough? But we all can make a difference. So I want to conclude our time today by looking at a quote from a really great lady from the late 80s, early 90s, named Miss Annie Lennox. I have different hats. I'm a mother, I'm a woman, I'm a human being, I'm an artist, and hopefully I'm an advocate. All of those plates are things to spin all the time. I look forward to having you with us for our next episode. Have a great week.